Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Yiboneh, 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 Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temaneh. Nechama shir chadash.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome home to Torah. A warm welcome home to Torah. We are in the Eretz Chemda Beit Midrash as guests. We are so grateful. Thank you very much. We are in Parshat Vayakhel. But before we begin, I want to make mention that we are learning in the Refuah Shelema of Notah ben Zeisel and Ashira Nechama Tova bat Sara. B'ezrat Hashem, they should have a complete and speedily Refuah, return to health. Also for the Aliyat Neshama of Moshe Halevi ben Yisrael, he should have an Aliyat Neshama. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this is very text intensive, but it's hopefully very spiritually uplifting. That's the goal here, so we can learn Hebrew at the same time, and I encourage you all to look down below in the description box for the links, and therefore you could actually follow along with us in the Hebrew. If you're really interested in the English source sheets, you can send me an email that is also listed below. And B'ezrat Hashem, if you want to join, I will send you the English source sheets that accompany the Hebrew. I would just want to mention, I want to give a special thanks to all those who have contributed to the Sefer Torah Fund. We're almost there. We're about 40%. We have 60% more to go, and then we are actively looking for a makom, a place for our weekday kavanah minyan. We could call it a beginner's minyan, a kavanah minyan, but it will go at a very nice pace, and tefillah, and we will have instruction before and after, and B'ezrat Hashem serve breakfast as well. Okay, so here we go. I want to introduce, or make a preface, an introduction to Parshat Vayakhel by reiterating something you probably already know, and that is that the Torah is not in chronological order. Everyone actually agrees with this, even though there's a machlokus between the Ramban and Rashi. Even the Ramban, who says the Torah is in chronological order, will still agree that not always. Okay, so Rashi is depending on what we call the oral Torah. Okay, in other words, we have traditions of when the Torah is in order and when it's not in order, whereas the Ramban is a little bit more literal and will assume that the Torah is in order, except where there are dates. There will be dates that show you, and I give you an example. Look in source number 1 at the bottom. In Bamidbar, right, chapter 1, verse 1, it says on the first day of the second month of the second year, and then 9 chapters later, verse 1, it says the second year of their exodus from the land of Egypt in the first month. So you have the first month of the second year in chapter 9, and you have the first day of the second month in chapter 1. So it's obvious. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, would agree. And not only where the dates are mentioned, but even where it's obvious. Okay, so what we're going to deal with here is there are going to be, I'm going to say 3 significant verses that show you that this Parsha, Vayakhel, is actually on Yom Kippur, the day after Yom Kippur, as opposed to, well, let's get into it. First of all, our Parsha begins in chapter 35 of Exodus, verse 1. It's number 2 on the source sheet. Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael, v'yomer eleihem. So Moses, what is Vayakhel? He gathered, he caused for everyone to come together. As Rashi mentions, it's a hifil, it's causative, causing people to assemble, but not through your hands, but through his speech. Let's call it, he enticed them, he encouraged them, he spoke words in which they all came together. So we're going to discuss what it was, what was so unique about this Vayakhel, this gathering or this assembly, that you don't find other places where Moses gathered everyone together. But Rashi says right away, it was Mimacheret Yom Kippurim. It was the day after Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is when he came down from the mountain with the second set of tablets. Okay? So it was on Shavuot in which the tablet, the Ten Commandments were spoken. It was on the 17th of Tammuz in which Moses came down the first time with the first set of tablets, which we know he broke as a result of the sin of the golden calf. So this is already much later. This is chapter 35. In other words, the Ten Commandments in Exodus are given over in chapter 20. Famous chapter of Exodus, chapter 20. If we look at the Yakar, let's just begin, because he right away tells us about what happened in Parshat Yisro. Yisro is starts with chapter 18. Okay? In chapter 18, Yisro gives this fantastic advice for Moshe to set up, we'll call it a hierarchy, or some kind of court system, where he is not the one who is who's sitting and judging all day. Remember, Yisro is concerned about his own daughter, which is Moses' wife, that the husband should spend some time, right? If you're there all day, when do you have time to spend with my daughter? But that's not really his motivation. His motivation is in what is most effective. Okay, so let's look at the Yakar. He begins by telling us, Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael v'chulei. Perish Rashi, he quotes Rashi, l'macharat yom ha'kippurim v'chulei. We saw Rashi. It's this time that Moses is gathering everyone together is the day following Yom Kippur. And he brings right away in Parshat Yisro, chapter 18, verse 13. And you can find that on the source sheet very easily in number 4. We'll have to look at the Rashi there too. But the verse says, V'yihim macharat, see the same word. It was the following day, V'yeshev Moshe, that Moses sat, lishpot et ha'am, in which he judged the people. Just a little bit of some background here. We're saying this is chapter 18. This is before the Torah was given in chapter 20. Well, Rashi says right away, no. This actually was the day after Yom Kippur. Mimacharat, from the word in the following day. What day was it following? The Torah doesn't tell us. Well, we have an oral Torah. It was the day following Yom Kippur. It's a very interesting Rashi. Now, what does it actually mean the next day? And Rashi says it was the day after Moses' descent from the mountain, which took place on Yom Kippur, meaning he came down with the second set of tablets on Yom Kippur. This is taking place before we even received the first. Obviously, the Torah is not in order. You must admit that it's impossible to say that the next day means anything but that Moses sat down to judge the people on the day after Yom Kippur. Now, before the giving of the Torah, it would certainly be impossible, because it actually says in verse 16, right, chapter 18, verse 16, and I make known the statutes. Since the statutes had not been given yet, right? In other words, in chapter 18, he's already saying, I made known, past tense, I've made known the statutes. So the Torah wasn't given until chapter 20. So it has to be not in order. In other words, Moses is there discussing law, right? People are coming as with court cases. So what kind of complaint would you have if you didn't even know what to complain about? And how could he judge if he didn't know how to judge? So that's what Rashi says. So, and from the time, and not only that, from the time the Torah was given until Yom Kippur, Moses didn't have any time to even sit, right? So the 50 days we left Egypt, we were walking through the desert. So it didn't happen before. He didn't have the laws. So from the time of Shavuos, he went up to receive the tablets, came down on the 17th of Tammuz. He wasn't around the people. He was up on the mountain. And then, after the sin of the golden calf, he goes back up to the mountain and he pleads with Hashem for our lives. Until God forgives us on the first day of Elul and says, come back up another 40 days. So Moses is busy with however you count it, the 80 days from the 17th of Tammuz, or even 120 days from Shavuos. So the only free time he ever had to sit and judge the people was the day after Yom Kippur. And because he received the law, he can actually use the law to judge people. So that's what the Rashi says, from the time the Torah was given until Yom Kippur, Moses did not have a chance to sit down to judge the people. And he goes through what I just said. On the 17th of Tammuz, he goes up the mountain. We know he broke the tablets. He went down from the mountain, he broke the tablets. The next day he ascended early in the morning and stayed 80 days and descended on Yom Kippur. So Rashi says, obviously this section is not written in chronological order. We'll stop there for the time being in the Rashi. Going back into the Yakar, he says, Uperish Rashi Sham, it's the third line down, Ki zehaya lemacharat Yom Kippurim. Clearly Rashi says it was the day following Yom Kippur. Now, near Lefarish, it seems like we can explain it the following way. Sheyadua, this is well known, and you should know. Shahakel zeh haya lahodia lehem mitzvat hamishkan v'hanatava. That this gathering, why did Moses gather everyone together? In order to inform them of this great mitzvah to donate, not just to donate, but the whole mitzvah of the Mishkan, and that we had to all contribute to it. Kamo shenit ba'er b'samuch, just as we're going to explain shortly. Meaning, in the Torah itself, from verse 4 onwards, is really all about the Mishkan. V'haya Moshe choshesh. What was Moses concerned about? And we should all be concerned. Pen yitnadev echad mehem leMishkan davar she'enu shalo. God forbid somebody should donate to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, or even the temple itself, when we give our yearly head tax. It should not be from something that doesn't belong to us. Meaning, if it doesn't belong to us, who does it belong to? Someone else. That would be called stealing, right? That's the simplest, definition of stealing. You're going to donate somebody else's stuff? Well, how did the Jews at this point end up with stolen property that Moses needed to judge? We'll find out. First of all, so he's telling them you're going to have to give. But you have to give me'itchem, from your own, as we will see shortly. So everyone had to give from their own. You're not going to build the temple, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, from stolen property. So it has to be from your own. So the Yakar says, Hu choshev ki hu tofsu bedin, that a person donating something might think that he acquired it properly. When would you ever have such a case? So I'll take you back many years to the plagues themselves. When we were in Egypt, during the 9th plague, the plague of darkness, we went into the homes of the Egyptians and we walked around. Remember, it was light for us and dark for them. So we were able to see with our own eyes where they hid their riches, their gold and whatnot. And when we left Egypt, we did leave with what would be considered ours at this point. But where was the big miracle? When did we end up with even more riches? By the sea. This is really a chesed from Hashem, if you really think about it. If we would have had to take out all the gold and all the riches of Egypt, it would have been a big burden. So what happens is we're standing on the other side of the sea after the sea had returned and all the Egyptians were drowned, and a great miracle occurred, and all of the riches and all the gold came up on our side of the shore, and that's when we bent down to grab it. And anybody who's familiar with Baba Metzia, in fact, we have people here making tzitzis. Imagine bending down, you and your friend, and trying to grab something that's hefker, something that is ownerless. So you may actually think that each one of you may think that you grabbed it first. So you'll say, oh, it's all mine, and the other guy will say, it's all mine. Well, it can't be. So therefore you have the whole sugya in Bava Metzia, how to divide, how to make an oath, and whatever entails a judgment to come out to see who it really belongs to. So in the meantime, the Yakar said, well, the person grabbed it bedin, or he thinks he grabbed it properly. V'zelo yitachen livnos habayis hagadol kadosh min hazeh min hagezel. And there's no way we're going to build this holy, great edifice, whether it's the tabernacle or the temple, through stolen property. The Yakar quotes a verse in Koheles. If anybody wants to write in a better understanding, I think what the Yakar is just doing is using the phraseology. It's Koheles chapter 3, verse 15, and it says, 16, chapter 3, verse 16. And moreover, I saw under the sun in the place of justice there is wickedness, and the place of righteousness there is wickedness. I said to myself, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there's time for every matter and for every deed there, as it says in verse 17. What I think it's referring to is just, if you have two people to come to court, usually one is righteous, one is correct, and one is in the wrong. But that could be the pshat. But over here, I think what he's just trying to say is that the Sanhedrin is going to sit in the temple or next to the temple itself, and that's the place where righteousness is supposed to be. So even though normally you have someone who's righteous and someone who's not in a court case, but the court itself has to be in a place of righteousness, and therefore you cannot use stolen material to build this great edifice where the Sanhedrin will sit. So he continues, Al Kain Hichriz Moshe Techila. This is why Moses first announces or publicizes, Mi Bal Devarim, who is the owner of things? Now, not just anything, but things that are in doubt. In other words, if you are going to donate and you know this belongs to you, there's no problem. But if there's a doubt that maybe someone else has a claim on it, therefore maybe it's not fully mine, let's clarify before the donation takes place. So anybody who is, maybe Baal Devarim can mean anybody who's in a dispute. However you want to look at it, you own something that is disputable. Yigash Elai leMishpat. Moses is saying, come forward to me for judgment. Ba'ofen shekol ha'am al makomo yavo b'shalom. In this way, in this fashion, the whole people will be able to enter a place or a space of peace and tranquility. V'nodeh lekol echad, and he informed each person, or basically it became known to each person, mashu shalo, what actually belongs to him or her. Oh, she'eno shalo, right? Or maybe it doesn't belong to you and you can't donate it. You have to give it back to the proper owner. Al yidei shahayadan beinehem, through the judgment that's going to take place amongst them. Again, this is talking about Parshat Yisro. Well, it's taking place in Vayakhel, meaning it's the same day, the same 24-hour period, the day following Yom Kippur, which is going to be very significant. And then he would inform everybody regarding their gift, the truma, as it says in verse 5, You have to take, they should take from their own. Mi'itchem means mishelechem. It has to belong to them, velo mishel chaverchem, and not belonging to someone else. And that has to be the case, because otherwise the whole verse is miyutar, or at least, I'm sorry, not the whole verse. Mi'itchem would be extraneous, would be superfluous, because how could you read it? Let's read that verse without the word me'itchem. We said it is, you'll find it number 6 on the source sheet. Take from yourselves an offering for the Lord. Let the verse say, take an offering. The very fact that it goes out of its way to say mi'itchem, Rashi says, it comes to teach from yourselves, what? Not stolen. That's what it comes to teach. So the last thing we said was that has to be the case. Otherwise, mi'itchem is miyutar, is totally extra. We saw how you can read it without it, and it would make total sense. So it must be coming to tell me, not from stolen property, as Rashi says. Now, the afal pi shabli safek. Now, even though that there's no doubt, lo haya yachol lishpot et kol ha'am b'yom echad. It's impossible that one person like Moshe would be able to deal with all the people, number one, and all in one day. So there must have been a lot of complaints or whatever, tainas, claims on property. People wanted to make sure that it really belonged to them. They would come forth. So not only would he not be able to deal with all the people, but how can he do it all in one day? Even in one day, how can you sit? 12 hours? 12 hours sitting down? whether it's a bathroom break or a lunch break or a rest. I mean, Moses was already, how old was he? 80, 81, whatever he was, 80, right? 81. So I'm sure that he wanted a little bit of nap time in the middle of the day, right? Ki afal pi, there is a concept. It actually says in chapter 18, verse 13 of Exodus, we read already, where it's Parshat Yisro, and the people stood before Moses from the morning until the evening. Now the verse actually says it. Now I want to make sure that we all understand. We have an oral Torah. You cannot read the Bible literally and think you understand it. Okay? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That never was, never is part of our tradition. It refers to insurance types of policies that basically responsibilities that people have to pay. You never, God forbid, ever took out someone's eye for an eye. So we have an oral Torah, even though it says min haboker ad ha'erev. It literally says that he stood there from the morning until the evening. You can't deny that the word says it. However, Hainu perish Rashi. If we actually look at Rashi, he says Shekol Hadan Din Emet La'amito Malelava Katuv Kila Nasa Shutaf Kodesh Baruch Hu B'Maaseh Bereshis. A very important point. If you look at number 7, Rashi explains this. I mean, I'll say it outside. That if a judge is sitting there making his judgment based on the evidence, and his whole goal is to come to the ultimate truth, the truth of truths, right? The most objective, correct outcome, then the verse itself applies to him as if he is a partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the creation of the world. And I would add the maintenance of the world. Because we find in Genesis, right, in the very beginning of the Torah, by each day, it says, V'yera v'voker, and there was evening and there was morning. I'm not getting into the mystical parts, but there is a concept that man judges here during the day, God judges at night, and God forbid if we don't do proper judgment at day, God will then justify his judgments. I just use like a phrase like that, at night. So it's very important for us to maintain a proper justice system, because if we don't, there are serious consequences to God then judging at night. But anyway, as long as we are maintaining judges, proper judges, who their whole goal is to not be bribed and not to be corrupt, but to come to the truthful judgment, that judge is partnered with God in maintaining. Now remember, God didn't just create the world and that's it. Every moment, every nanosecond, God is actually, this is what we Jews believe, that God is constantly recreating the world. Okay, so Rashi says that in number 7, Exodus 18:13. Is it possible to say that Moses actually sat in judgment from morning until evening? But this teaches us really that any judge who issues a true verdict as truth demands it, even if he only spends 1 hour, and Moses probably spent 6 hours, okay, not 12, reaching his judgment, Scripture deems it as if he engaged in the study of Torah the entire day, and as if he were partnered with the Holy One, blessed be he, in the act of creation, as it says in Genesis, and it was evening and it was morning on each day. Any questions, comments about the actual, is that clear? Is it interesting?
What is objective truth exactly?
Oh, that's okay. We're talking about the judge has to have that in mind. So he's going to evaluate the evidence. That's not what he thinks. I mean, obviously he has to put in shikul hadas, but it's based on the evidence.
Right.
And so he goes to school for a long time to learn how to evaluate evidence.
Right.
And the laws. So if he's not corrupt, I think he'll get siyata d'shmaya. Remember, he's not alone also. He's got other people to argue or haggle with, what they see.
Right.
And so if he's humble, he doesn't know the answer, he'll go with the majority.
Right.
If he knows the halacha, he'll stand up and say, no, you're incorrect. And have a So I'm not sure this is really answering your question. You're asking a very deep question, and that we'll have to deal with another time. But you're right. How does one come to the ultimate truth? There is a truth in heaven, by the way, you should know, and there's a truth down below in earth.
Where?
Which truth are we looking for?
One down here.
That's right. Because that's all we have, whatever is in front of us. The evidence is here in front of us. We may even go against the truth in heaven. And we see that in the whole story of the famous, the story I'm thinking of? The oven, the tanur haknai, the snake oven. We're not going to get into it now, but there's a whole story where it doesn't matter what it says in heaven, even if Rabbi Eliezer is correct, even if a box comes down, even if the tree jumps 400 parsangs, even if the stream goes backwards, even if the walls of the Beit Midrash close in. We don't believe in signs from heaven. We take the evidence and shikla dat. But anyway, let's move on. All right, we're turning the page. We're now at the top of the second page. Now, this has to be the case according to the Kli Yakar. Emasai hodiam maaseh hamishkan. Where else, when else, was Moses able to give over the instructions regarding the construction of the Mishkan? Right, we already said he was extremely busy, number one, even if he got the instructions earlier on. But we're saying that it was given over by Yom Kippur, and he comes down with that instruction. Mikol makom gam hanadava lo nishlama b'yom echad. By the way, this was probably the greatest fundraiser exercise ever, because within a few days they actually had everything they needed, and Moses had to tell them, enough, stop, we have all we need. However, we're going to see a whole nother, I'm going to say explanation, and a whole nother understanding of that shortly. So the people brought it over the next few days. V'ulai hayam modiam. Perhaps what he was explaining to them, shekol davar shnaim chalukim olav, but that anybody that owned something where there was a dispute, there was another person who disputed it, shelo yitnum nadava ad ki yitbarer techila hadin imi. He shouldn't give, he shouldn't donate that gift, that truma, until it had been clarified first, the din of who it belonged to. Okay, so that's his introduction. Now he says, V'al tzad haremez nomar. From a certain aspect of a hint, we're actually able to say the following. Shahakhel zeh, that this gathering, this unity of everyone together, was for what? Hoya l'taveh hashalom beinehem. It was in order to mediate peace amongst all the Jews. Ki ein adam dar im nachash bekfifa achas. Very strange Gemara in Yevamos. You'll find that in number 10. Basically, I hope I don't get in any PC trouble here, but I probably won't, because it's pretty straightforward. The Gemara explains that if there were two deaf mutes, right, a male and a female, who were deaf mutes, that they could actually get married. When someone gets married, they're getting married according to the laws of Moshe and Israel. So that means the rabbis. The rabbis wanted to ensure there's going to be peace in the home. So a deaf mute female with a deaf mute male can somehow communicate and love each other and not get, let's say, not be short-circuited, okay? So they can get married according to the sages. But if you turn the page to the rest of that source, but with regard to the word is imbecilic man and an imbecilic woman. So let's just use the phrase, someone who is incapable of maintaining their emotions. And therefore, if you have two crazy people, the rabbis will not allow them to get married because they're probably going to kill each other. So that's what it says. A person cannot reside in a basket, meaning closed quarters, with a snake. Therefore, the sages would not allow them to get married. The Hebrew in our source sheet that we brought down was, it says, Ki ein adam dar im nachash b'kfifa achas. A person cannot live with a snake under the same roof. That's okay? So you're talking about someone who's, let's say, extremely mentally challenged. Let's use that. And that would probably be, are you guys in agreement with me? That's probably the PC way to say it. Extremely mentally challenged. Okay? You cannot allow that marriage to take place, meaning under holy matrimony as we do. Okay, so the continuation of the Yakar. Vayakhel sheratza lahodia maseh mishkan. After the fact that he wanted to inform them, Moses wanted to let everyone know how to construct the Mishkan. Shayu kulam shutafim bo. Remember, all of us are all partners in this edifice. Not that we're literally living in the Beis Hamikdash or in the tabernacle, but all of our money is going towards the construction of it. Therefore, we are partners in this edifice in which God is housed, so to speak. It's doime kilu hoshiv es kulam b'medur echad. It's as if we're all dwelling together. If we all put our blood, sweat, and tears, money, into this edifice, we all have an equal share. It's as if we're all partners and living together. This is the beautiful Achdus. Wouldn't it be nice to have the temple built in our lifetime and see a whole nother sphere of life? Therefore, Moses needed to gather everyone together, techila, first, shiyuba aguda achas, so that we would all be united. Al Kain Perish Rashi. That's why actually Rashi's telling us, Shahaya Zeh, this took place, Lemacharat Yom Kippurim, that it was the day following Yom Kippur. And what happens on Yom Kippur? There's a build-up, there's a crescendo, right? You got the month of Elul, we're talking about the whole 40-day period, the whole month of Elul building up to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Then you have the 10 days of Tshuva, besides Rosh Hashanah, where everyone is like asking people for forgiveness and wants to, and then there's this, like not a heavy dark cloud, but a really light cloud on Yom Kippur, where there's like this haze of shalom that somehow surrounds the Jewish people, like the Shekhinah is present, and everyone loves each other, everyone forgave each other. What happens on the next day? It's still there. But you know what? A couple days later, it's no longer there. But the day following Yom Kippur, people are still in the spirit, right? They still got the spirit. So listen to what it says. All the different encampments in the desert, right? It was always, and I'll just use the word, Vayakhanu. They encamped. But when we got to Mount Sinai, we'll see it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael. We were, as we see in Rashi, if look in number 11, Israel encamped there, meaning singular, Israel together, Vayichan Sham Yisrael. Rashi says, it was Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad. We were united, and we were united in heart the whole time until and including Yom Kippur. So the Yakar explains that all the different encampments, there was makloket, arguments, vitoromet, and complaints. Chutz, except for Menachania Shekodem Matan Torah. Right? When we arrived at Matan Torah, we were united, as it says, that we were, that Israel singular encamped there. If that's the case, Im Kain. How would Moses ever be able to gather them all together where there would not be any, right? How is it possible to ever gather them when there are argumentation and they're not on the same page, where their das are not shaveh, if they weren't on the same page? Ve'ezazman muchan lezeh, which time period would be most fitting for this unity? Matzah Moshe lahakilam kiratzonu, that Moses would be able to find that they would be gathered together willingly and according to his will. Havi Omer, one could say, Zela Macharat Yom Kippurim. It would be the best time the day following Yom Kippur. Ki bi Yom Kippurim hashalom mitavek beinayim. As I just described, and we all are aware, the unbelievable, spiritually uplifting day of Yom Kippur, the holiest day, where we mamish like ascend to like the status of angels, and we're all nice to each other, right? That would be the day that peace has really mediated between them. And certainly the essence of the day itself, we are all considered unified. Therefore, the most easiest day, I don't know if the easiest is the best translation, but the easiest day to get them all together would be the day following the following day after Yom Kippur. Kizman shasholom ha'etmo kayam, because the peace of that day still exists. Aval, but im yomo yomayim yamod. But if several days pass, as lo yukam hashalom, that peace we know dissipates and would no longer be there. Ki kavar nit paradah havilah. At that point, the package unravels. That package of peace has unraveled. V'kol ish darko poneh. And each person, his own way, he leans. Right? Everyone's going in different directions. Now, ukadei shelo yitnaged el shalom divrei rivavo shebeinayim be'esek mamon shebein ish lechavero. Now, again, because Yom Kippur is like Shabbat, we don't deal with money, right? We're not dealing with any of the normal stuff of business. So, in order that nothing opposes this shalom, such as words of argumentation, like when people deal with money, I mean, that's like, you know, when I've seen people go nuts, like absolutely off the charts when it comes to money. And Bizrat Hashem, we should all figure out how we can ourselves deal with money properly, where that does not rule our emotion. But I get it, right? It's blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. But anyway, so on Yom Kippur, nobody's dealing with money. Ki ein l'shalom shel Yom Kippurim esik bezeh. Certainly, right? There's no business being done on that day. Al ken yosha Moshe sham lishpot be'etzem hayomahu. According to the Yakar, already on Yom Kippur, when he brought the tablets down, he already started to deal with court cases. Kadei shemikol tzad yesh shalom b'neihem, in order to keep that peace going. As yoroyin l'dor b'medor echad, because then that would be the most fitting time for everyone to really feel they're all, unified in this in the Mishkan. Dahainu ha-Mishkan ha-Meshutaf l'kula. Remember, the Mishkan were all equal partners. Okay? Achar shenasu lachadim al yidei ha-Mishkan ha-Mitzarfam. Now, after the fact that we all became totally united through the Mishkan in which we all are partners, Ma'az metzinu kama pamim shehakila Moshe. We do find through the 40 years that we're in the desert, Moses did gather us together. Those other times that he gathered us together were not the day following Yom Kippur. And how much more so, according to what the Educator has written in a derech malitza, in somehow advocating for the Jewish people or presenting to the Jewish people this idea. As it says in chapter 35, verse 3, if you find that on the source sheet, that would be number 12. It says, do not kindle fire. Now we have 39 malachot. We don't have all the malachot mentioned in the Torah. We do seemingly have, don't go out of your boundaries. So, right, we have the idea of not carrying, which we'll talk about again shortly, and do not kindle a fire. But otherwise, the 39 malachot are learned through the oral Torah, or there's an opinion, it's through the oral Torah, but it says malacha in different forms 39 times in the Torah. So over here, should not go out fire of maklokas, argumentation on Shabbat. What happens on Shabbat? Most people are at home with the family. TV is off. You're not answering your phones. You're not going to the stadiums. You're not playing poker. This is the time where you're not doing much. What happens when people are bored? Sometimes they get in arguments. That's what happens sometimes. So he says, so this idea of do not ignite a fire on Shabbat is don't provoke and don't be provoked. Because shenir pim hema melacha, because they are weakened in terms of work. In other words, they are soft. In other words, they're not doing any work. And we're going to talk about that very shortly. V'yesh lechush biyoter az le'esh hamachloket mitlakakat betok dvarim betelim. We have to be concerned, or more concerned, that the fire of argumentation will be ignited because people are bored. They're not doing anything. Of course, by the way, Shabbos is set up for us to learn Torah. Okay, that's what Shabbos should be. Obviously, to spend time with the family, teach Torah, talk Torah, sing songs, eat nice food, but it's time for Torah. Im kain yotha amar Vayakhel. According to the Yakar, then it makes sense that it says Vayakhel, that Moses gathered everyone together. Shekilam liyot baguda achas ayidei tzivoy lo sava'aru. Therefore, he gathered them together in order they should all be united through the commandment, do not ignite, do not get in maklokas, don't separate yourself. And he says, as Rashi says, Sha'al diburo, that it was through his speech he got everyone together. It was pleasing, it was nice, enticing, he got everyone together. Al pish diburo heim na'asafim, that they all gathered together. Okay, we're at the bottom, last paragraph and a half, on page Taf Lam and Gimel. Ela hadavarim asher tziva Hashem la'asos otam. Now I want you to look in the first few verses. So in Parshat Vayakhel, so we have here in verse 35. I'm sorry, chapter 35, verse 1. So it says that Moses gathered all of the assembly of Israel together, and it says, he said to them, Eila hadavarim. You see Eila hadavarim? If you want to see on the English sheet, so that would probably be source number 2. These are the things. Things imply more than one thing. You always have this idea that things is, if it doesn't have a number, it's usually 2. So there's at least 2 things. But if you go down to verse, if I'm not mistaken, it's verse 4. And where do we see that on the source sheet? Actually, it's number 14. It's verse 5. Moses spoke to the entire community of the children of Israel, saying, this is the word. Well, in Hebrew, zeh hadavar. So I just want you to just think a second. You have verse 1, and it speaks about Shabbos, right? Verse 2 and 3. And then skip to 5, and it's only talking about the Mishkan. So if it says, Moses is going to say over these things, but it only says Shabbos, then there's a new paragraph. And then it says, this is the thing. So just from an objective view, the Yakar is trying to say, that first verse that talks about Shabbos is talking about 2 things. It's not talking about the Mishkan, because the Mishkan is being talked about in verse 5. As verse 5 onward is talking about the Mishkan. So what are these 2 things? We know Shabbos for sure, but what else? So let's go back into the Yakar. He says, Ela hadavarim, these things which God commanded for them to do, to make, devarim, shnayim b'mashma. So the word devarim, at least, is 2, plural. V'hulo higid lehem b'pamahu ki'im b'mitzvahs haShabbos. At least according to the Yakar, both these things, whatever it's talking about, is to do with Shabbos. Now, Shabbos could mean just Saturday, but it can also mean the week. Ki ein lomar shedevarim koi gam al mishkan she'izkir achar kach. The word devarim is not going on, verse 5, and the Mishkan and onwards, that's said later, because we have a clear verse Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem. This is the matter, this is the thing that God spoke to them about the Mishkan. So if that's the case, Zeh hadavar, by the Mishkan it's talking about, that's fine, but what do I do with the word Ela Devarim? These are the things back when it talks about Shabbos. That's question number one. Question number two. It says, V'od Kasher, it says, Sheishes Yamim Te'aseh. Te'aseh with a Tseirei. Okay, two dots that look like this. So what is that? Te'aseh. Shouldn't it say Ta'aseh as a command? 6 days you shall work? No, it doesn't say that. It says you may work. But the Clear Car says the very fact that it's with the tseirei, it says te'aseh, actually means me'atzma mashma, that the work is coming on its own. And we have to, what does that mean? That doesn't make sense. Somebody's doing it. Well, it's coming on its own. Te'aseh is passive work. It's coming on its own. We will discuss it. And the third question in this paragraph, he says the whole paragraph seems to be miyutar, extra. Because if you go back to chapter 20, which I mentioned is where the Ten Commandments is listed, and actually also in Deuteronomy chapter 5:13, the same words appear by Shabbos, it says, Sheishes Yamim Ta'avod. 6 days you must work. Okay, you have to work, which we're going to talk about very shortly. Kavar Biyarno Zeb Parshas Yisro. Now, I do have a little comment here on Parshas Yisro that I'd like to share with you, and that's in number 17 and 18. You guys know who the Radap is, right?
Radap?
You heard of the Radap?
That's you.
Oh, yeah, that's me. Haravar Dovid Poston. Okay, so I quote the Yakar, not me, but it's me. The Yakar describes in Parshas Yisro the difference in the phraseology. Ta'avod is describing serving a master. You have to have a master-servant relationship for ta'avod. In fact, the word eved would be a servant, and therefore that's referring to serving Hashem. And the word malacha, and Rabbi Breitowitz spoke about this on Tuesday, it's a mastery over creation, but basically it indicates your own work. Your own work, what you are creative and doing on your own. And you're doing it for yourself, not necessarily for God. But we'll see how that fits in. So I have here in number 18, the Yakar explains that over there, and I'll just read it. He says very simply in the first two lines, why is this extra? You already had. So he says, V'od shehitchil ba'avoda v'sayim ba'malacha. In the verse, in chapter 20 of Exodus, verse 9, right? Sheishes yamim ta'avod v'asita kol malaktecha. Right? You're going to work and you're going to do malacha. What's the difference? So the Yakar says, the lashon avoda tzarich bior. Obviously, avoda, service, needs explanation. Ein eved ki im betziruf adon. So the idea of working is only when you have a master and you're serving him. So that's Hashem. If you're working for yourself, who's your master? You don't have a master. You're your own master. Anyway, he goes into the Olos Ephraim and explains a little bit more about it. But let's go back into the Yakar. The last statement was, 1 second, you already have the idea of ceasing work on Shabbat. What do I need it again here in Vayakhel? Okay. So now he says, Al Kain Omerani. Now I will tell you what I think, the Yakar says, that the word divarim, we said it's plural, it means more than one thing. Lefi shekol ikar mitzvah zu, that this command, this mitzvah that Moshe is referring to, yes, it's litzavot, ha'isa litzavot al malechas mishkan. It is referring in general to all the work done for the Mishkan. But what should you do? You should actually, like it's a mitzvah, involve yourself in serving Hashem the 6 days of the week. Ubiyom hashvi'i, and on the 6th day, lo yitasku bo, you should not involve yourself with the Mishkan. Turn the page. Ki Mishkan doiches Shabbos. This is a famous idea. Whatever comes first always pushes off the second. So Shabbos came first, and therefore Shabbos pushes off the Mishkan. We cease, we desist, we do not involve ourselves in the 39 creative acts used to construct the Mishkan on Shabbat. We stop. But this is where the Yakar explains what are the Devarim, what are the two things. Kan Shnei Devarim. Here we have two things. Echad, litzavot amaseh Mishkan. The actual do the work for the Mishkan. So there is work for the Mishkan. And the second is shelo yitasku bo b'Shabbos. So just to take you, and so on Shabbos you don't involve yourself. So we saw the difference in, right, ta'avod is you shall work, not you must work. Over in our Parsha, it doesn't say you must work 6 days. It's the work will be done. And remember, we're talking about, and the bringing, the idea of bringing, it's one of the malachot, which we're going to talk about shortly. That is the free will offering. Out of the 3 offerings, 2 were obligatory. You couldn't give more, you couldn't give less. It was a half shekel. But the third was the ingredients of the 13 different items that you could bring, and you can give more or less. And that is what you are bringing automatically. Okay, so as a preface for what I'm about to tell you and try to answer the question, if you look in 15, which is chapter 35, verse 2, 6 days work may be done. That's te'aseh. Okay? If you go to number 16, and that would be the 10 Commandments, 6 days you shall work. You must work and perform all your labor. It says ta'avod. Okay, so I want to take you on a small journey into Pirkei Avot, and it's chapter 2, Mishnah 2. Okay, Rabban Gamliel said, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he said, Torah study is good together with an occupation, for exertion of both makes sin forgotten. All Torah study that is not joined with work will cease in the end and lead to sin. I'd like to read the rest. All who exert themselves for the community should exert themselves for the sake of heaven, and then the merit of the community's forefathers aids them, and their righteousness will endure forever. Okay, nevertheless, as for you, I, God, will bestow great reward upon you, as if you had accomplished it on your own. Now, what does it mean to study with work? Now, Yehuda asked me about kollel, guys. First of all, kollel is usually a 2-year stint. First 2 years of marriage, that's all kollel really is. After that, a person should make a decision if they're going to rabbinics, they're going to be a teacher, then they should continue to study. Okay? Now, what about a rich guy who can study and wants to study? No problem. Should he have a side job? Of course. So I don't know what kollel has to do with this, right? But what it does say, and there are opinions, I want to read this idea here. This is in the Art Scroll little book on Pirkei Avot. Too busy to sin.
Right.
Dissatisfaction is a prime factor in man's vulnerability to the wiles of the evil inclination. Unfulfilled people may fantasize that only if they had this or that pleasure, they would truly be satisfied. So Rabbi Gamliel teaches that if a man studies Torah to satisfy his spiritual thirst, in conjunction with an occupation to provide his physical sustenance, he will achieve an overall sense of satisfaction that precludes sin. The Kutzker Rebbe told his followers, I don't expect you to refrain from sin because you don't have an interest in it. You should be too busy to sin.
Right.
The Mesilas Yesharim writes, one of the devices of the evil inclination is to put unrelenting pressure on man's heart, leaving him no time or emotional space to be introspective or consider direction or the direction his life is taking. The Mishnah, our Mishnah too, stresses the importance of time in the prevention of sin by urging us to fill our hours with healthy pursuits. Umasha ne'emar. So the Yakar ends by explaining. Remember, it says te'aseh milacha, which we said already was not active. It was passive work being done. What does that mean? Lefisha kol ikar tzivoy zeh. The prime command at this point was haya al haba'at hanadava, the actual bringing. So we all know we live in cities that have eruv, right? You can't walk out of your house carrying your key, right? We have all kinds of buckles, belt buckles, and tie clips, and we figure out, we're geniuses, how to get, instead of just leaving your key underneath your flower pot. But anyway, that's also a problem. But let's just say we figured it out, and we have an eruv, but we know that you cannot just walk outside in general without an eruv carrying things. So the encampment that Moses sat in was in called the Machane Leviah. Okay, that was a public thoroughfare, and according to Psalms, each one of the different tribes, we had 12 tribes surrounding, that was called a Rishus HaYachid. That was a private domain. And people were bringing from their homes into this public area these ingredients, these materials for the Beis HaMikdash. So we're going to read this verse a little bit different than most people would understand it. Let me just find my English sheet. I'm going to read it like this. It's verse 7. It's 36, verse 7. So look at number 20 on the source sheet. So Moses commanded, and they announced in the camp, V'yitzab Moshe v'yaviru. That's also to pass over the kol. The voice went around the machane, around the camp, saying, Ish v'isha, right, men and women, lo ya'asu od melacha. They shouldn't do any more. What's the next word? Milacha. But milacha what? Litrom. Litrom et kodesh. Stop giving. Don't bring the holy truma. And it says, the same verse, V'yikale ha'am mehevia, and the people stop bringing. But this is another verse. The next verse says, the malacha ha'isadayam. The malacha was actually finished, meaning they had enough. You don't have to bring anymore. I'm going to read it like this for you guys. That before Shabbos, right before Shabbos, Moses says, keep in mind, we have a malacha called carrying. Don't carry on Shabbat. We already got Shabbos, actually before the Ten Commandments, already in Mara. There's a different opinion, but basically everyone agrees that Shabbos was one of them. Some say it was 10 Commandments, some say it was 3 or 4, and there's a different order. But everyone agrees Shabbos we already got at Mara, a week and a half after we left Egypt. Okay, something like that, within 2 weeks after we left Egypt. So Shabbos we knew about, but perhaps either as a reminder, right? Because now this is the first time we're actually commanding you to carry things, and you may have thought on Shabbos you can still violate Shabbos by building the Mishkan. No. Mishkan is secondary. Shabbos is first, and I'm reminding you, everybody, stop to bring. So the first statement is regarding Shabbos. And by the way, come Sunday morning, you don't have to bring anything either because we really have enough. That's how I'm going to tell you it's going to be read, at least the way I understand it. We go back into the Yakar, and he says, right, Te'aseh melacha. Lefish kol ikar tzivoy zeh haba'at hanadava. All of that has to do with bringing. Ki gam zeh nikra melacha. Even bringing is called melacha, which we see in that verse. 36 verse 6. Ish isha al yasu od melacha. He's telling you not to bring. He's telling you don't do melacha. So carrying outside from a private area to a public area or vice versa is called melacha. And then it says at the end of the verse, Yikale ha'am mevi. So the people stop bringing. Im kain, if that's the case, habat hanadava me rishus l'rishus nikreit melacha. We understand carrying from one domain to another is called melacha. Va'ota melacha. And regarding that melacha, te'aseh. Te'aseh means it's done on its own, because these were the truma. This was the free-willing offering that they were bringing, the third ingredient, right? The different ingredients, not the half shekel that were obligatory. That's why it says regarding that malacha, te'aseh. Ki lo hayachol lomer ta'aseh malacha. You couldn't say that, right, to do it in an active way. Derek tzivoy wasn't a command. Because anything that was given with a free will heart, you cannot use the command or think of it as an obligation. But anybody whose heart motivated him, he's giving meyatzmo, like we said, teaseh. It's happening on its own. That's why it says teaseh malacha, meyatzmo mashma, on its own. But comes Yom Shvi'i, on the seventh day, Shabbos Lashem. It's cessation, stopping for the sake of God. V'asur bo gam habat hanadava me rishus l'rishus, and on Shabbos itself will be forbidden to carry and give this gift from one domain to another. Now the last three lines is very interesting, because many people may not be aware of this, even though it says in chapter 40, verse 17, which you'll see on, I think, the last sheet, in verse, it's 21 on the source sheet, chapter 40, verse 17. It came to pass in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, so that's Rosh Chodesh Nisan of the second year, the Mishkan was set up. The next verse says that Moses erected it. How's it? It was set up, but Moses erected it? It's not in the right order. And we understand the words, Hukam HaMishkan. If you look at Rashi in number 22 on Leviticus 39:33, it says, now they brought the Mishkan to Moshe. So it says in Rashi, well, let me just explain outside. By the way, so Moses attempted to set it up every day, and he actually accomplished it. 7 days, the last 7 days of Adar. Then Yom Hashmini, the 8th day, he actually let it, the 8th day he erected it, and it stayed erected. God said don't. So there was a 7-day period of Moses putting together and dismantled it, but even one person couldn't do it. These planks were heavy. It took 2 people to carry them. And they had to put them on agalot. They had to put them on, wagons. They were extremely heavy. So here it says, because they could not erect it, in Leviticus 39:33, since Moses had done no work for the Mishkan, he was like directing, he delegated, and those other people were involved. The Holy One, blessed be, left for him the task of erecting the Mishkan, since no human being could erect it by himself because of the heaviness of the planks, and no human was strong enough to put them up, but Moses was able to put them up. What happened? God made it appear as if Moses was doing it. He did the hishtadlut, he did the effort, but it was by miracle. So Moses said to the Holy One, blessed be, how is it possible for a human to erect the Mishkan? God said, you work with your hand. Moses appeared to be erecting it, and it arose by itself. This is what it means. The Mishkan was Hukam Mishkan. The Mishkan was set up. It was set up by itself. Okay, so this is another answer to Te'aseh. So the first Te'aseh was the Nedava that was given should not be given on Shabbat. And the other Te'aseh is referring to the Mishkan itself. So the Yakar says very simply, Lefi Midrash Rabseinu Zal, Ha'omer Mishkan Nase Kitsato Me'alav. It's very strange because he says Kitsato, that the rabbis explain the Mishnah in the Medrash that the Mishkan it was basically made a little bit on its own. Like the menorah. The menorah, Moshe threw the gold into the fire and it came out as a menorah. So too, the Hakamat Mishkan Hayat Me'elav. So too, it also happened on its own. And we see from the word Hukam Mishkan. And therefore it says, Te'aseh Malacha, Me'alev Meshmashma. That it was on its own. Okay, there really is a lot more. I always encourage you guys, do some studying on your own. You'll enjoy it. Don't be afraid of the Hebrew. Okay? So this was a lot, in a certain sense, along the similar theme of Achdus that we've been speaking about. It's so necessary to figure out a way. And it could be if we daven for the base of Mikdash, because the Mikdash itself is a way to cause unity. Now, it could end up being unity because of the the non-Jews not so happy about it. And therefore, we already know that anti-Semitism has its place. It's actually quite constructive in creating our own unity. But as Rav Noach Weinberg always says, if we create the unity, then God doesn't have to force it on us. It doesn't have to happen that way. If we have the unity, Bezrat Hashem will merit the building of the Beis HaMikdash and the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu B'mheir V'yameinu soon in our days. And with that, I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom and also a great life. And we'll see you on the other side. Shabbat Shalom.
Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh,